Imagine for a second that a visionary billionaire approaches you. You've never met this person, but they offer to send your 10-year-old child to live in a permanent, high-tech human settlement on Mars.
Right. Okay.
And your kid is just begging to go because, all their friends have already signed up.
I mean, it sounds like the setup to a sci-fi movie, or maybe a really intense parenting blog post.
I know, it's a bizarre premise.
Yeah.
But stay with me here. This company is offering an all-expenses-paid trip to a totally new frontier. So would you let them go?
Well, I mean, before any parent answers that, they probably want to look at the environmental reports from Mars, right?
Obviously.
And the reality is incredibly harsh. Like, Mars has no magnetosphere, meaning the surface radiation is intense. It also only has 38% of Earth's gravity.
Which is a huge deal for a growing kid.
Exactly.
Mhm.
If a child goes through puberty in that specific environment, the physical results are catastrophic. Their growing skeleton, their cardiovascular system, their actual brain cavity, I mean, they will all permanently deform. Yeah. Oh, and the company running this settlement didn't even require parental permission to take them. They just, let your kid check a box on a website saying they had it.
Right. So hearing all of that, the answer is a hard no. It's an insane proposition. You would never knowingly send your child into an untested, severely altering environment with permanent developmental consequences.
Nobody would. I mean, it would be considered the greatest ethical violation in modern history.
But the wild thing is, we already did exactly this. Welcome to this deep dive. Today, our mission is to explore some truly profound excerpts from Jonathan Haidt's book, The Anxious Generation.
It is such a fascinating read.
It really is. We're going to unpack a sudden and massive transformation in human development that has happened right under our noses.
Mm.
And more importantly, we're going to figure out exactly why it's making young people so incredibly anxious.
Which is a huge issue for anyone listening right now.
Yeah, so, okay, let's unpack this. Because I know it's really easy to dismiss this as just another older generation complaining about kids these days. Every older generation thinks the younger one is doing it wrong.
Right. We've seen that cycle for centuries. The older generation always complains about the new music or the clothes.
Exactly.
But the data from the early 2010s shows something fundamentally different. We aren't talking about shifting cultural tastes. We are talking about a total collapse in adolescent mental health.
A total collapse.
Yeah, between 2010 and the end of the decade, major depressive episodes surged by 145% for teen girls
Oh my God.
and 161% for teen boys in the United States.
And the numbers on self-harm are even more terrifying, honestly. The source text notes that hospital emergency room visits for non-fatal self-harm nearly tripled for preteen girls in that exact same window.
Tripled. It's just staggering.
But before we get into the causes, let's define our terms here. The text uses phrases like internalizing disorders. What does that actually mean for a kid going through it?
So an internalizing disorder is essentially distress that is directed inward. Think depression, social withdrawal, and severe anxiety.
Okay.
And we really need to draw a sharp line between fear and anxiety. Fear is your biological response to an imminent threat. Like a leopard jumps out of the bushes, your heart rate spikes, you run. The threat is happening right now.
Right, it's immediate.
Anxiety, on the other hand, is the anticipation of a future threat. What we are seeing in the data is an entire generation stuck in a perpetual state of anticipation.
Like their internal alarm bells are just constantly ringing.
Exactly. Ringing for threats that haven't even happened yet.
Let me stop you there, though, on behalf of everyone listening, because the immediate reflexive response to this is always, well, isn't Gen Z just depressed because the world is a complete mess?
Right, the state of the world argument.
Yeah. I mean,
Yeah.
they grew up in the shadow of the 2008 financial crisis. They are dealing with the existential dread of climate change, political polarization, school shootings. It feels entirely rational to be anxious when you look at the world they inherited.
It's a very common argument. And, it sounds perfectly logical until you start stress testing it against the actual data.
Okay, how so?
Let's look at the financial crash first. If the 2008 crash caused this, the millennial generation, who actually entered the job market during that crash and saw their economic prospects completely shattered, well, they would have seen a massive mental health spike.
Oh, that's a good point.
But they didn't. Millennial adolescent mental health remained relatively stable.
That makes sense. Because Gen Z was basically in elementary school or preschool during the 2008 crash. They weren't exactly checking their 401ks.
Right. And furthermore, teen depression rose steadily throughout the 2010s, which happens to be exactly when adult unemployment plummeted to a historic low.
So the economy was getting better.
By 2019, the economy was booming, yet teens are getting significantly more depressed.
Okay, but what about the pandemic? Didn't COVID cause this massive mental health crisis? I feel like everything broke in 2020.
So COVID poured gasoline on a fire that was already raging. The hockey stick spike in the data, I mean, the moment the charts go nearly vertical, happened in 2012,
Wow. 2012.
long before anyone had ever heard of COVID-19. And regarding shared crises, like climate threats or global instability, history shows us something really fascinating.
What's that?
When a society faces a collective threat, people rally. Suicide rates historically drop during major wars. People engaging collective action and cooperation boosts.
So we come together.
Yes, human beings don't get deeply depressed when they face threats collectively. They get depressed when they feel isolated, useless, and disconnected from their community.
So if it isn't the economy and it isn't just the news cycle, how do we rule out that it's not just a uniquely American problem,
Yeah.
with our specific political climate?
We look at the rest of the world. If this were driven by U.S. politics or American school shootings, the data would only show a spike in the United States. But we see the exact same hockey stick spikes in teen anxiety, depression, and alienation happening in Canada, the UK, Australia, New Zealand, and the Nordic nations.
Wow, so everywhere.
Culturally diverse places with totally different economies, different healthcare systems, and different political climates all saw the exact same plunge in mental health at the exact same time,
Yeah.
the early 2010s.
The very moment smartphones and front-facing cameras flooded the global market.
Exactly.
Okay, we see the data, we know when it happened, but I'm still stuck on the how. Like, how exactly does a small glass rectangle cause a psychological collapse? It's not emitting some mind control frequency.
To understand the mechanism, we actually have to go back millions of years into evolutionary biology.
Okay, let's go.
Human beings are completely unique mammals.
Right.
By the time a child is 5 years old, their brain is already 90% of its full adult size.
That's huge.
But compared to a chimpanzee or a lion, human kids take forever to grow up. We have an incredibly long, slow-growth childhood.
Right, but if evolution is about surviving and reproducing as fast as possible, why leave our kids as vulnerable, small-body weaklings for a decade and a half?
Because we are cultural creatures. Our evolutionary advantage isn't sharp teeth or fast running. It's our ability to learn from each other and accumulate knowledge over generations.
So we need the time to learn.
We need a massively long apprenticeship to learn the tools, the social nuances, and the specific culture of our community. And to ensure this massive amount of learning happens, evolution gave children 3 innate, powerful motivations: free play, attunement, and social learning.
Let's talk about free play first, because I think people hear play and they just picture kids goofing off to burn energy, but the text frames it as intense, high-stakes neurological wiring.
Play is the work of childhood. Psychologists use the analogy of serve and return.
Oh, right.
Think of early childhood interactions like a game of ping pong. A toddler makes a funny face, that's a serve.
And the parent laughs and makes one back, so that's the return.
Exactly. It's totally unpredictable, requires precise timing, and builds the foundational social circuitry of the brain. They are learning action and reaction in real time.
Low stakes, risk-taking. Wrestling with friends, falling out of a tree, negotiating who gets to use the swing next.
Yes.
And if they build the basic wiring through play, how do they learn the actual social rules of the group? Like how to fit in?
That's the second motivation, attunement. We are biologically wired to tune our emotions and physical movements to others.
To sync up.
The sociologist Emil Durkheim called this social electricity.
Social electricity, I love that phrase.
It's generated when people move together in rhythm. Think of kids playing clapping games or jumping rope or singing together. They're doing the same thing at the exact same time. It creates a deep, ancient sense of communion and belonging.
Here's where it gets really interesting, because we have this beautiful, synchronous physical reality, but the virtual world these kids were suddenly dropped into is described in the text as disembodied, asynchronous, and one-to-many.
Yes, that is the crucial shift.
Wait, asynchronous? You mean like instead of a real-time conversation, I'm just leaving a comment on a wall and waiting hours to see if anyone cares?
That is exactly it. A real-time ping-pong match of conversation is synchronous. Social media is asynchronous.
We've disconnected.
When an adolescent is spending 20 hours a week on platforms like Instagram or TikTok, they aren't playing in any developmental sense. They are engaging in joyless, performative labor.
Wow. performative labor.
They're acting as their own brand managers, carefully curating every post, trying to manage a one-to-many broadcast to an audience that can judge them instantly and permanently.
This might explain why the data shows teen girls being hit so much harder by this transition than teen boys, especially regarding self-harm.
It absolutely does.
Oh,
Boys certainly suffered, but they often migrated toward multiplayer video
which
games.
is different.
Right, because while still screen-based, it involves synchronous play. You're talking to your friends in real time on a headset, working together to achieve a goal.
A shared goal, yeah.
But girls, historically and developmentally, are more focused on interpersonal relationships and social dynamics. They migrated heavily toward highly visual, asynchronous platforms like Instagram and Tumblr.
Platforms built around visual comparison, relational aggression, and exclusion.
Yes, you are sitting alone in your bedroom, physically isolated, scrolling through a bottomless feed.
Your brain is craving that social electricity, but instead it's getting a cold IV drip of metric.
Exactly, which completely rewires the third evolutionary motivation, social learning, how kids figure out who they're supposed to copy.
Right.
Evolution gave kids two main strategies for figuring out who to learn from. The first is conformist bias, basically copying the majority.
Just blending in.
It's a pure survival tactic. If everyone in your new middle school is wearing a certain type of shoe, you immediately want that shoe.
And the second is prestige bias. Copying the most excellent people in a specific domain. The source text has this great example for this.
The archery one, yes.
Yeah, imagine you live in a hunter-gatherer society and you want to learn archery. You look for Frank the archer because Frank actually hits the target every time.
Right.
His prestige is earned through real-world excellence. You look up to him because he has a skill that provides tangible value to the community.
But Silicon Valley hijacked these deeply ingrained biases. Tech platforms quantified prestige. They turned social standing into hard, visible numbers, likes and followers.
So suddenly, prestige is no longer tied to actual excellence or communal value.
Exactly.
It's the Kim Kardashian effect. The concept of being famous for being famous. Fame became entirely severed from real-world excellence.
And because a middle schooler's brain is running that conformist bias software, when they see a post with 1 million likes, their brain automatically signals, this is what the majority values, I must copy this to survive.
That is so dark.
What's fascinating here is the timing.
Huh?
This isn't happening to adults whose prefrontal cortexes are fully formed.
Right, we can handle it a bit better.
It is hitting kids exactly during what developmental psychologists call their sensitive period for cultural learning. That's roughly between the ages of 9 and 15.
The book compares this to moving to a foreign country, right? Like, if you move to France before you're 12, you're going to pick up the language perfectly, lose your native accent, and completely absorb the French culture.
You will fundamentally feel French.
But if you move there when you're 20, you're always going to have an accent. You'll always be interpreting the culture from the outside.
The brain has an open window where it actively seeks out the cultural norms it needs to survive. Gen Z was the very first generation to migrate into the culture of Instagram and TikTok right during this highly sensitive window.
So they just absorbed it completely.
Their brains looked around the virtual environment, absorbed the metric-driven, appearance-obsessed, highly judgmental norms of social media, and locked them in as the baseline for reality.
If we look at how kids are actually spending their days now, we hit this massive, tragic contradiction in modern parenting.
The paradox of protection.
Yes. Parents today are absolutely terrified of the real world. We treat the physical world outside our front doors like it's a war zone, even though statistically, crime and danger in the physical world have plummeted since the 1990s.
It's safer than ever.
But we overprotect kids physically, and yet we leave them completely underprotected, entirely unsupervised in the virtual world.
We won't let a 12-year-old walk 3 blocks to the park with a friend.
Right.
But we will hand them an internet-connected device that gives them access to billions of strangers, extreme adult content, and highly addictive algorithms, all behind a closed bedroom door.
There is this gripping anecdote from the source material that sums this up perfectly. A 14-year-old girl named Isabel Hogbin wrote an essay pointing out this exact hypocrisy.
I remember that essay. It's powerful.
She talks about how her mother was in the kitchen meticulously ensuring Isabel was eating 9 differently colored fruits and vegetables for her optimal physical health.
Like a really diligent parent.
Exactly. Meanwhile, Isabel and her friends were in the next room, completely unsupervised, stumbling onto Pornhub. Because a site like that has absolutely zero age verification.
Just a button that says, I am 18.
Right. Her mother was obsessing over micronutrients while leaving her daughter's psychological development entirely unguarded.
Psychologically, this perfectly illustrates the shift from what we call discover mode to defend mode.
Okay, let's break that down. Discover mode versus defend mode.
When a child plays outside, unsupervised in the physical world, they take small physical risks. They climb a tree, they scrape a knee, they get up.
They learn they can handle it.
Their brain learns a crucial lesson. I can handle danger. I can survive setbacks. This puts their neurological system into discover mode. They become curious, open, and resilient.
But when we physically overprotect them, they never build that baseline resilience.
Exactly. And then we drop them into the infinite threat landscape of social media, a place where you can be socially shamed by hundreds of people in an instant, permanently.
Which forces the brain into defend mode.
Biologically, this activates the behavioral inhibition system. To avoid using dense jargon, think of this as your brain's freeze response.
Like a deer in headlights.
It's the system that turns on when you hear a predator snapping a twig in the dark. You freeze. Your stress hormones spike, your appetite drops. You are entirely focused on scanning for threats.
And when kids live their social lives online, this system is chronically activated.
Yes.
It sounds like keeping a car engine constantly redlining in neutral. Like you aren't actually going anywhere, but the engine is screaming at 10,000 RPMs.
It is a perfect way to visualize chronic anxiety.
Eventually, that engine is going to blow because it was never meant to sustain that level of stress indefinitely.
They become fragile and afraid to take real-world risks because their system is exhausted from constantly scanning for virtual threats.
So if you're listening to this and you're a parent, or even just someone who remembers growing up before 2010, you're probably wondering how we actually walk this back.
Right, what's the solution?
Because we aren't just here to diagnose a disaster. So what does this all mean for us? The source text outlines a way out, proposing 4 foundational reforms.
And these are collective action solutions, meaning they work best if we all do them together and they cost absolutely nothing.
Love that. What's the first one?
The first reform is no smartphones before high school. That means roughly age 14. Give kids basic flip phones or smartwatches if they need to communicate with you for logistics, but keep the internet browser and the apps out of their pockets.
Okay, but I can hear parents pushing back on this immediately. Like, if I do that, my kid is going to be a social pariah because everyone else has an iPhone. How does a parent actually enforce this in the real world?
That's why it has to be collective action. You don't have to convince the whole school. You just need to talk to the parents of your child's 3 or 4 best friends.
Form a little pact.
Yes. If you form a micro-community of 5 families who all agree to give their kids flip phones, your child suddenly isn't the only one. They have their social group, and the stigma is broken.
Okay, reform number 2. No social media before age 16. Just keep them off the algorithmic feeds entirely.
Let their brains get through the most vulnerable years of that sensitive period of puberty before you connect them to a fire hose of social comparison.
Third reform, phone-free schools. And the text is very specific here. This doesn't mean keep it in your backpack. It means using locked pouches or lockers for the entire school day.
Yes, physically inaccessible.
But again, parents push back on this. What if there is a school emergency? What if there's a shooter and my kid needs to text me?
School security experts have actually addressed this. During an active crisis, having a phone makes a child less safe.
Really?
Yes. The screen creates light and noise. It distracts them from following a teacher's instructions, and a flood of panicked texts spreads misinformation.
Oh, I hadn't thought of that.
Furthermore, we cannot design daily educational environments around a statistically extremely rare worst-case scenario. For the 99.9% of days that are normal, a phone in the pocket, even if it's turned off, is a cognitive drain.
Just knowing it's there.
Knowing the phone is there, vibrating with notifications, fractures a student's attention. Locked pouches, like yonder pouches, force kids to actually look at each other in the cafeteria, talk to each other, and rebuild those face-to-face social skills.
And finally, the 4th reform. Far more unsupervised play and childhood independence in the real world. Let them walk to the store. Let them play in the park. Let them get that scraped knee so they can learn how to get back up.
It's ultimately about reclaiming the mind. In the book, there's a reference to the Stoic philosopher Marcus Aurelius, writing in the 2nd century.
Oh, wow. Taking it way back.
He advised us not to waste our lives worrying about what everyone else is doing, saying, or thinking. He warned that being preoccupied with the goings-on of others throws you off and keeps you from focusing on your own mind.
It's incredible how a Roman emperor perfectly diagnosed the trap of the social media feed 2,000 years ago.
Isn't it?
We are wasting our precious cognitive energy monitoring a virtual crowd instead of cultivating our own internal lives.
Which leaves us with a critical, proactive question for the future. We've seen the devastating data of what happened when the smartphone pulled Gen Z out of the real world in 2010.
Yeah.
But technology is accelerating. Right now, generative AI companions are getting highly sophisticated. Deeply immersive spatial computing like 3D VR goggles are hitting the mainstream.
Right. So if a flat 2D screen in a kid's pocket was enough to completely rewire childhood, shatter adolescent mental health, and deform their social development, what happens to the children born today?
That is the big question.
They are going to hit their sensitive periods just as highly immersive. 3D alternate realities become normalized. If a 2D screen rewired childhood, will an immersive virtual reality completely erase it?
Every hour spent in a hyper-realistic virtual environment interacting with an AI is an hour not spent looking at a human face, learning the nuances of a genuine smile, or feeling the social electricity of shared physical presence.
So here is our challenge to you today. Think back to that Mars analogy. We cannot send our kids or ourselves into a high radiation, zero gravity virtual world and expect to come back unchanged.
We really can't.
Look up from your device today. Reconnect with the physical world. Make eye contact with a stranger. Call a friend instead of texting them. Take your mind out of defend mode and step back out into discover mode. Thanks for taking this deep dive with us. We'll catch you next time.